What if I told you that one of the most profitable retail empires on the planet is, by legal definition, a charity? This is IKEA. In fiscal year 2025, it recorded 44.6 billion euros in retail sales. 915 million people walked through its doors. It operates 490 stores across 63 countries. It is the undisputed largest furniture retailer in the world. And it is, technically, a nonprofit. No shareholders, no publicly traded stock, no traditional owner waiting on a dividend check. IKEA is legally owned by a Dutch charitable foundation whose stated purpose is to promote innovation in architectural and interior design. Let that sit for a moment. A company generating tens of billions in annual revenue, with nearly 1 billion customer visits per year, exists under the same legal category as your local food bank. But here is where it gets genuinely fascinating. Because beneath that nonprofit label lies something far more deliberately engineered than simple charity. Something that took decades, multiple countries, and extraordinary legal creativity to build. But calling IKEA a nonprofit barely scratches the surface of what was actually constructed here. Beneath that charitable label lies something far more deliberately engineered than any furniture assembly manual. Investigators and journalists who dug into the structure found a carefully coordinated web of foundations spanning the Netherlands, Luxembourg, and Liechtenstein. These weren't loosely connected entities. They were precision instruments, each one serving a specific financial function, each one passing money to the next with remarkable efficiency. The result was extraordinary. On certain income streams, IKEA paid an effective tax rate of 0.06%, not 6%, not 0.6%, 0.06. And here's the part that makes this story genuinely fascinating rather than simply scandalous. Every single piece of it was technically legal. No laws were broken, no fraud was committed. The system worked exactly as designed, because the design was the strategy. IKEA is technically a non-profit. Here's how that makes it billions. Stay with us, because this gets considerably more interesting. To understand how IKEA became this, you have to go back to rural Sweden in 1943. Ingvar Kamprad is 17 years old, riding a bicycle, selling matches to neighbors, then pens, then fish, then Christmas decorations, anything with a margin. He was not building a vision yet. He was just obsessed with the transaction. The name IKEA is not a word. It is an acronym built from his initials, Ingvar Kamprad, combined with Elmtarid, the farm where he grew up, and Agunarid, the village nearby. By the time he was 27, he had added furniture to his mail order catalog. By 30, he made the observation that would quietly rewire an entire industry. Shipping assembled furniture was expensive. Shipping flat components was dramatically cheaper. If you removed the assembly before shipping, the economics changed completely. One packaging insight, not a product, not a brand, just a packaging insight, restructured the entire cost model of furniture retail forever. But Kamprad had a second obsession running alongside his business ambition, a deep, almost compulsive hatred of paying taxes. This was not casual frustration. This was a defining force that shaped every major structural decision he would make for the rest of his life. As Sweden's tax rates climbed sharply through the 1970s, Kamprad made a decisive move. He relocated himself to Switzerland and began systematically moving his company's structure out of Sweden entirely. The intellectual property, the brand, the trademarks, the concept went to Liechtenstein. The holding structure went to the Netherlands. Each move was deliberate, each jurisdiction chosen for specific legal advantages. What emerged from this process was something no one had built before, a nonprofit foundation sitting on top of one of the world's most profitable retail operations, not as a coincidence, not as an accident, but as the direct result of one man's obsession with keeping his money out of government hands. The man is now clear. The motive is now clear. The structure is about to get very interesting. But before we get into the tax architecture, we need to understand the business engine underneath it, because without this one insight, none of the rest works. Picture a fully assembled chair being loaded into a shipping container. It takes up enormous space. The box is awkward, fragile, and expensive to move. Now picture that exact same chair broken down into flat panels, packed tight, stacked efficiently. Suddenly you can fit 3, 4, maybe 5 times as many units into the same container. That is the flat pack model. And yes, the shipping savings are significant, but the real genius is something most people miss entirely. In traditional furniture retail, someone assembles that chair. A factory worker, a delivery crew, a store technician. That labor costs real money, and it gets baked into the price you pay. IKEA eliminated that cost completely, not by automating it, but by transferring it to you, the customer. You do the work, IKEA saves the cost. And somehow, you still pay the same price or less than you would anywhere else. That is not a coincidence. That is the model. But the flat pack model goes even deeper than logistics and labor savings. There is a powerful psychological dimension at work that most shoppers never consciously recognize. Research published in Harvard Business Review confirmed what behavioral economists now call the IKEA effect. The finding is striking in its simplicity. People dramatically overvalue objects they have partially created themselves, regardless of the objective quality of the finished product. A wobbly bookshelf you assembled yourself feels more valuable to you than an identical one someone else built. This means the frustration of assembly, the confusing instruction diagrams, the leftover screws, the hours spent on the floor, is not a flaw in the experience. It is a deliberate feature of the design. IKEA does not just cut costs by transferring assembly labor to the customer. It engineers a deeper emotional attachment to the product in the process. You built it, so you love it. The cost transfer and the emotional attachment are not separate outcomes. They are two sides of exactly the same design decision, working together perfectly. Now, let's step inside the store itself, and what you find is not a retail floor. It is a carefully engineered maze. If you look at an IKEA floor plan from above, you will see a single winding path that loops through every department before eventually delivering you to the exit. There are no shortcuts built into the design. If you try to turn around, you are moving against the flow of foot traffic. This is not an architectural limitation. It is a deliberate behavioral engineering decision made by people who studied how humans spend money. As you follow the path, you walk through fully staged room setups, a complete living room, a finished bedroom, a functional home office. Each one is designed to make aspirational living feel personally achievable rather than distant or expensive. By the time you reach the smaller item section, the candles, the picture frames, the kitchen accessories, your mind has already committed to the larger purchases. Your spending defenses are quietly, systematically lowered before you even realize it happened. The store psychology extends far beyond the layout. Food is the next layer of the system. In fiscal year 2025, IKEA served 915 million customers globally, and roughly half of them ate something during their visit. Swedish meatballs, cinnamon rolls, $1 hot dogs. The menu is cheap, comforting, and deliberately affordable. That affordability is not generosity, it is engineering. The restaurant is not a customer service amenity, it is a retention mechanism. A hungry shopper leaves, a fed shopper stays, and longer time in store directly correlates to higher spend. The data confirms this completely. Average time inside an IKEA store is 90 minutes, 3 times the average for a typical retailer. 60% of purchases are entirely unplanned at the point of entry. The food operation alone generates over $2 billion annually. If it operated independently, it would rank among the top 10 global restaurant chains by revenue. IKEA built a furniture store. It accidentally, or very deliberately, also built one of the largest restaurant businesses on Earth. Now we reach the most fascinating part of this entire story, the ownership structure. And to understand it, you need to know something that almost no one does. There are actually 2 completely separate IKEAs. The first is Ingka Group. This entity operates all the physical stores worldwide and is owned by the Stichting Ingka Foundation, registered in the Netherlands. It is a non-profit, no shareholders, no owners, no dividends, and it legally cannot be sold to anyone. The second is Inter IKEA Systems. This entity owns the actual IKEA brand, the trademark, the concept, and the entire intellectual property. It is controlled by the Interogo Foundation, based in Liechtenstein. Here is where it gets genuinely extraordinary. Every single IKEA store on Earth pays Inter-IKEA Systems a franchise fee equal to 3% of total turnover. 3% of every transaction, across every store, in every country. That adds up to over 1.3 billion euros every single year, flowing continuously from the stores directly to the brand owner. That 1.3 billion euros in annual franchise fees does not simply arrive in Liechtenstein. It travels, first through Luxembourg, passing through an entity called Interogo Finance, before eventually reaching the Interogo Foundation. And what happens along that route is where things become genuinely extraordinary. Between 2012 and 2014, Interogo Finance paid an effective tax rate of 0.06% on certain income flows. Not 6%, not 0.6%, 0.06. This was achieved through 3 interlocking mechanisms: Dutch tax exemptions on royalty income, a tax treaty between Luxembourg and Liechtenstein that reduced withholding taxes to near nothing, and an internal loan structure where IKEA's brand was effectively sold to itself. The interest payments on that internal debt then reduced taxable profits in the jurisdictions where income was actually generated. No single piece of this was illegal. Each component existed within the rules of its respective jurisdiction, but assembled together, they produced a tax rate that approached zero on over €1 billion of annual income. In 2017, the European Commission opened a formal state aid investigation into whether the Netherlands had granted IKEA illegal tax rulings. The core question was straightforward but consequential. Did the Dutch government give IKEA preferential treatment that no ordinary company could access? As of early 2026, that investigation remains open. No illegality has been proven, no recovery has been ordered. But the potential liability, if regulators ultimately rule against the structure, has been estimated at up to €1 billion. And here is where the story gets genuinely complicated. Both things are simultaneously true. The structure was built using legitimate legal instruments, real treaties, real exemptions, real accounting mechanisms, and it is currently under serious regulatory scrutiny from one of the most powerful competition authorities on the planet. Meanwhile, the IKEA Foundation distributes approximately €260 million annually in genuine charitable grants targeting child poverty, refugee crises, and climate change. Whether that philanthropy justifies the structure beneath it is a question regulators are still actively arguing about. So after everything we have uncovered, the real question is, why can nobody beat IKEA? The answer is 3 separate competitive moats that reinforce each other simultaneously. The first is the supply chain. 1,800 suppliers, built over 70 years, producing costs no new entrant could replicate for decades. You cannot simply copy the pricing because the pricing is the result of relationships, volume, and infrastructure that took generations to construct. The second moat is the experience itself. The labyrinth, the staged rooms, the Swedish meatballs, the cultural identity. None of that is replicable by copying the product catalog. Because at IKEA, the experience is the product. The third moat is the most permanent of all. The foundation structure means IKEA cannot be acquired, cannot be inherited, and cannot be dissolved. There are no shareholders to buy out. No hostile takeover is legally possible. The Stichting Inca Foundation is, by deliberate legal design, permanent, not just stable, not just protected, structurally, constitutionally, irreversibly permanent. The camera pulls back to that familiar blue and yellow exterior, but now you see the full picture. The Dutch Foundation sitting above it all, the Liechtenstein structure operating behind it, the Luxembourg routing running beneath, 490 stores feeding every layer simultaneously. IKEA is not one business. It is 3 businesses stacked inside each other, each one making the others stronger, each one protecting the others from collapse. Ingvar Kamprad built this to outlast him. He died in 2018 at 91 years old. The following fiscal year, IKEA generated 44.6 billion euros. The company he started with a bicycle and a box of matches now belongs to no one and lasts forever, because technically, it is a charity. So the next time you find yourself wandering through IKEA, searching for the exit, unable to find a shortcut out, remember this: you are not lost by accident. You are standing exactly where a team of behavioral scientists, tax architects, and retail engineers always intended you to be.